Crafty friends, it's Jess from jesscrafts.com, and today I'm here with the final card in this mini Halloween series, where as part of the Halloween series you can enter to win this memory box border die that says Happy Halloween. For today's card, I wanted to pull out some of my Lawn Fawn stamps, but also this neat and tangled stencil. I had picked it up a while back because I thought it was a fun pattern, but haven't used it, and so when I went to pull out some of my older supplies, I decided to mix it with a new supply that I hadn't used before. I kind of like to do that sometimes so that I still get use out of things that I've had in the past. I don't forget about them, but mix it up with something fun and new to play with. So to get started, I am covering the whole paper. It's a piece of 110-pound cardstock with distress ink. And when you're trying to cover a whole sheet of paper, I find that it can be pretty effective to drag the ink pad all over the sheet of paper. However, sometimes when you do that, it pulls at the adhesive on the ink pad, and I have had ink pads come apart. Now, most of the companies in the crafting industry are really good about replacing any products that have problems or things like that, and I have found that super glue will put them back on. But I wanted to be a little more gentle with them, so I spread some ink on that way, but I also used my blender, and I knew it didn't have to be perfect coverage because I'm going to be stenciling over it. Of course, to make things easier, you could just start with an orange piece of cardstock, but I thought it would be interesting to add a little bit more of some variation to it, so it wasn't just solid orange behind. And as the distress ink dries, you'll see some of that variation where there are some darker bits and lighter bits. And once I have the orange covered, and it won't be completely solid, but all the paper is covered, there's no white left, I am going to work on my stenciling. And when I work on stenciling, if I know that I don't want to rip my paper, I like to use the Frog Delicate tape. It has been the best tape that I found where I don't worry about my paper at all. But if you find that it sticks a little bit, then my recommendation would be to put it on your clothing or your skin first, and that takes away a little bit of its stickiness. And as I apply the ink through the stencil, I'm using, I believe, the Carved Pumpkin now, and the base was Wild Honey, basically two different colors of orange distress ink. I'm going to focus the ink on the center of these shapes, so you can see there's a more solid area in the middle, and they sort of burst out from those shapes, and I'm going to focus most of the inking on the center so that it sort of fades out into the edges there. And I do that just by, when I come off of the ink pad, I press directly into the center, and then only once I've rubbed off some ink do I sort of pull it out to the sides a little bit. And I usually try to tape down maybe one side of my stencil so that I can lift it up and see how it's coming and make sure I didn't miss any spots. But by making sure that the ink is not completely solid in every area, I think that it makes the background just a little bit more interesting. I'm also going to add some of this shimmer spray, and I like this because it's really subtle. It doesn't add any color. It just adds an all-over sparkle, and it's a kind of subtle through the stencil, but with the inking, it's a little bit more noticeable. It's just something, because I think glitter works well on Halloween cards. I kind of feel like fall becomes glitter season because I really like it for Christmas as well. So once I had that finished, I backed it on a piece of black cardstock, and then I'm ready to do some sentiment stamping. Normally I just stamp a single sentiment, but I wanted to make the sentiment sort of an element on the card. So rather than centering my eventual ghost that I will use on a piece of cardstock, for example, I basically let the sentiment be a grounding element for the ghost. And I stamped it in VersaFine jet black ink, or onyx black ink, because I want it to be a nice sticky ink, and I'm going to add clear embossing to it. That'll again make it just stand out a little bit more because it is over a pattern background. Sometimes stamping sentiments onto a pattern, they become a little bit less noticeable or difficult to read, but I find one way to combat that is to add the clear embossing over them. So I am ready to basically pick the stamp set to use, and I had a whole bunch of different Lawn Fawn Halloween sets, but I chose this ghost set because you can dress up the ghosts in all kinds of different cute outfits, and it was a really popular set last year. So I just decided to stamp a whole bunch of different elements from it because I wasn't quite sure at this point exactly how I wanted my card to turn out. So I stamped all 3 ghosts and then a bunch of different fun accessories for them. And all of the products will be linked in the video description below. Right now I'm not entirely sure what the name of the stamp set is, so I don't want to steer you wrong, but it will all be linked in the description. And I use my Favorite Things Black Licorice Hybrid ink because I will be doing some Copic coloring. I generally prefer to stamp a couple of images at a time if I think that they will be used because I like to stamp with my Misty, and to stamp only single images takes a longer time. I am going to be coloring the ghosts and the accessories with Copic markers, but I will be using the matching or coordinating dies to cut them out, and so I want to make sure that I don't go outside the lines. Sometimes I like fussy cutting because I can just go outside the lines, and so the time that I spend being careful about not coloring outside the lines, I kind of, like it makes up for the time that you have to fussy cut. I don't know if that was clear, but it's kind of like a trade-off there. So to color the ghosts, I don't want to just leave them pure white, although you certainly could, especially if you were trying to make a quick card. But in this case, I already spent so much time on the background. I was fine with, adding in a bit more time. I'm actually using the C markers, C00 and C1 to just add that subtle shading. And I'm going to use the same C markers, but a little bit darker. I believe the C5 and C3 to color in this cat accessory here. And basically I just add some darker areas around the very edges of the ghost, but I overall try to keep it pretty light. And I like to use the C markers in this instance because if you use the W's, that kind of gives more of a feeling of warmth than something that's alive. And ghosts, obviously aren't. And even if you're trying to imagine them. So like something that isn't alive, like even a toy, again, you might want to make it less warm because it gives that, that effect. Like a robot would be a cool gray for that reason. So once I had some elements colored, I was die cutting them out, and I just put the rest of the elements off to the side because I didn't know exactly how I wanted to color them, but they were stamped and ready to go for when I needed them, and I went with just the cat. I colored the ghost before I added the stamped faces. There are a lot of different face combinations, and like in the instance of coloring it as a cat, there are some whiskers. And I prefer to wait until the end to do the stamping of the face pieces because when you color over the black lines, sometimes it makes them a little less subtle. They don't stand out as much. And so to make sure that those lines are nice and crisp, I stamp them after I'm done coloring. And that also allows me to use my VersaFine, which is a little bit of a darker black. And I know there are some other Copic friendly black inks out there that are a little bit darker, but I don't have them, and so I prefer my VersaFine for this. Now, when I stamp my cat whiskers, I stamp them upside down. The straight whiskers are supposed to go on the top. And so now you know, and that is how they are in the packaging. So I should have noticed that, but I didn't happen to. Because I will probably be mailing most of my Halloween cards, I had thought about popping up the ghost, but then I didn't want him to get crushed in the mail. And so I just decided to glue him on flat. A lot of the thinner foam tape will go through the mail just fine with a stamp, but sometimes they get crushed or caught in the machine, and so I'm trying to be better about creating flat cards for the ones that I mail. And I like to use two-way tape a lot because it's super strong, but for those little pieces, the multimedia mat works great, particularly with that fine tip. And so I've paired up that ghost there with the Booyah sentiment, and he's sort of like using that as grounding him. And you see there, that was the point where I realized that his whiskers were upside down. Anyway, I wanted to show you the second card that I made with the stamp set, just so you could see an extra idea. And again, when I stamped all of those little elements, I stamped them after I did my coloring. So like there are the smiley faces, but also the stitches. And another reason that I did that is because I wanted to know like what was my final product going to look like. And I didn't want the lines to be faded away. So I would know, like, I would want to put the stitching here because I was going to use that particular hair topper for it. When I did this, I added the green hair on the two sort of like Franken ghosts, and then I didn't like that my card didn't have any of that green incorporated. And so one way, if you feel like there's a color that's sort of just standing out, is you can always make your own coordinating cardstock with the same Copic markers you colored with. So if you felt like, oh, that color that I used in my main image coloring needs to be somewhere else on the card, you can always add a quick mat around your sentiment or around the whole card base just by coloring it in with the same coordinating Copic marker. And so that's how I chose to tie it in. I didn't have to worry about finding the perfect piece of green pattern paper. I just used the same marker. And then I'm going to mount that on some cardstock. So that is it for my cards today. If you like this video, please give it a thumbs up. If you're interested in more crafting tutorials, be sure to subscribe to my channel. As mentioned, this is part of a short Halloween series where you can enter to win that memory box die by simply being a subscriber and leaving a comment on this video and also the other videos in the series to have more chances to win, but check out the details in the video description below. It's open internationally, and I will share some other videos on the screen and some of the products in the video description below as well. Thanks for watching. Bye.